In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a pleated heading and a drapery panel. And I'll show you two styles of pleats. A goblet pleat like this, that's rounded at the top, and a triple pinch pleat, which is also called a French pleat. When making pleats and spaces in a drapery, you want your spaces to be around 4 inches and the space on each end to also match. So we're going to do 4-inch spaces on this drapery. What's left over goes into the pleats. Usually about 5 inches makes a really pretty pleat. So you want to set that as your goal. And on most fabrics that are 54 inches wide for your home deck fabrics, by the time you put your side hems, all this works out perfectly. Start by measuring how much fabric you have on the finished drapery. So I have 48 inches. And then measure in from each side 4 inches and mark it with a pin. And the other side, 4 inches. And since I started out with 48, I know that I now have 40 inches in between these two pins. I can go ahead and measure it and make sure I have 40 inches exactly between the two pins. Now this is going to vary based on the width of your materials. Since I have 5 pleats, I want to have 4 spaces between the pleats. We'll end with a pleat before these last spaces, so 5 pleats, 4 spaces. I did 4 inches on each end. I want to have 4 inches in each pleat as well. So 4 spaces times 4 inches is 16 inches. I'm going to subtract 16 from the 40, which was between the last two pins, and that leaves 24 inches. I'm going to have 5 pleats. So whatever is left over, that 24 inches, that's going to be the 5 pleats. So I'm going to figure that out. I'm going to use a calculator because I'm going to come up with a fraction. So 24 divided by 5 pleats is 4.8 inches in each pleat. And that's a great size. A good size for a pleat is around 5 inches, or maybe a little bit more. So go ahead and mark in the spaces and the pleats. So it's 4.8. So that's almost 5 inches. And you can go back and adjust these later. We're just pinning it in, and then 4. And I'm just going to stand the pins up. And then mark a space, and then marking a pleat, marking a space, and a pleat, and the last space, and then here's the last pleat here. Now that all the pins are in, I can pin all the way through. You could also mark this with chalk or with a erasable marker. So all these pins represent my pleats and spaces. To make the pleats, you're going to take the first pleat area, bring the 2 pins together, and pin that together. Take one of the pins out. And I like to also pin down at the base of the pleat, and you can measure down to make sure you have 4 inches. So I'm just going to stab a pin in there and then pin that in. That helps to keep your fabric from moving around when you go to stitch it on the sewing machine. So you'll do that for every pleat. Fold the 2 pins together. Use 1 pin to hold the pleat together at the top. And this is very stiff. It's hard to push a pin in because you do have the buckram and the double fold of fabric. Then measure down 4 inches. And continue going, putting in all of your pleats. I'll go ahead and do one more. And then measure down 4 inches. So that's what it looks like before you go to the sewing machine. Now when you go to stitch at the sewing machine, you're going to stitch straight down to 4 inches. You want to back stitch at the bottom and back stitch at the top. Now I'll show you one that I've already sewn. So here's a drapery that's already sewn. You can see the pleat is stitched in. I'm going to show you how to sew the heading. You'll want to use a heavy thread like a quilting thread and a good strong needle. You may want to wear a thimble because you are sewing through a lot of layers. I'm going to pull off enough thread to do a double thread to go through the needle. And a big eye on the needle is helpful too when you're using double threads. Pull that through and then bring it all around together to the end and put a good knot in there. Now I'm ready to tack the pleat. We're actually going to tack at the base of the pleat. So to form a triple pleat, I'm going to crease it on the top, reach inside and open that up and push it all down equally. And then you can crease the other sides, and that's where the buckram comes in handy. The buckram allows you to make those creases. Squeeze it all together, and holding it with one hand, start your needle and thread inside a fold at the bottom of the buckram. So you can see where the buckram ends. It's difficult to stitch into that heavy buckram, so I'm going to stitch just below it, over about 1/4 inch. Starting inside allows the knot to be hidden down inside the pleat. Then wrap all the way around, go in on the other side underneath the buckram, and all the way back through. Since I'm using 4 strands of thread, you can just stitch once, or I'll just do it one more time just to show you the technique. Pull the thread tight, and then where you came out with the needle and thread, just catch a thread, and we're going to make a knot right there on the side by making a loop and then going through the loop. And that knot is sort of raised, so I'm actually going to pull it in by stabbing into the pleat, into the buckram, and pulling that tight. And that pulls that knot down so it's not sticking out and pronounced. Trim away your thread. And that's the finished triple pinch pleat. You also can make a goblet pleat out of a pinch pleat by taking the top and opening it up. You can hear the buckram in there, I think. It's crispy. And that makes a rolled, round goblet pleat. You can stuff that with a little batting or a piece of pipe insulation or foam to help keep the shape. But that's 2 style pleats with 1 technique. I hope you'll enjoy making pleated draperies.